Thank you so much to Vicki and PBS NewsHour Classroom for hosting these. This is our third season, and it's we've had PBS Student Reporting Labs on before and Voters of Tomorrow, and I'm just so excited to have you all together tonight to discuss civics, voting, and Gen Z. And I want to first introduce our guests, but really just get into my questions for them and then open up the conversation to everyone else here tonight. And if we have some time to just talk about some of the headlines that we're seeing around the midterm elections. I know here in New York City, early voting started a couple days ago and across the country. And I'm really curious to hear from from Leah and Student Reporting Labs and Berto, and then Victor and Grace from Voters of Tomorrow about your thoughts and what you're seeing among the Gen Z voters and Gen Z people who are trying to get out, working really hard to get out the vote. So just to introduce our guests, first of all, we have Leah Clapman. Leah is also, I'd like to thank Leah for giving us this space here, PBS NewsHour Classroom, for the past 3 seasons. It's been such an amazing space for teachers and school staff across the country, much needed space to come together. And I'm just going to mute some people. Okay. And we love you, but I got to mute you. For now. And Leah Clapman's the executive director of student reporting, PBS Student Reporting Labs. It's a youth journalism. If you don't know what it is, and you should know, it's an amazing youth journalism program for young people, and for NewsHour. And we also, and Berto Suarez is one of the co-hosts of PBS Student Reporting Labs and a senior in high school doing all of that. But I'm not surprised because I teach high school kids and I'm forever amazed by the work, the way you can multitask. And we also have Voters of Tomorrow here today. Voters of Tomorrow, if you're not familiar with them, they were founded in 2019 by then 17-year-old Santiago Mayer, an immigrant from Mexico. He recognized the lack of political engagement at his high school, and he decided to get young people involved in civics and voting. And we have Grace Friedman. She is, among many things, at Voters of Tomorrow, she is the messaging director. And Victor, among many things that he does, he is, I believe, the strategy director at Voters of Tomorrow, if I'm correct. And I can go on and on with their bios, but let's let them speak. We like to hear from them. So I'm just gonna ask a series of questions, and to everyone joining us tonight, we are going to open up the floor to you. About the way these usually work is I ask some questions of the guests, and then I open it up to the other guests, which are all of you attending this Zoom tonight. So my first question is pretty general, and let's start with Leah and Berto. Tell us about the work you're doing right now to get out the vote for midterm elections. Why don't we start with Leah?
Sure. So at Student Reporting Labs, we just aired last night on the NewsHour's YouTube channel a special called We the Young People, Moments of Truth. So it collected stories from across the country, and Berto was one of our amazing student co-hosts. So we filmed up at a really cool studio that Berto can talk about, where we were looking down on the White House. It was kind of eerie because we were like right there, and we could see that the snipers were pointing right back at us.
Yes, I was talking about that when I was there. It was a very fun experience. I was waving at them. I couldn't see them, but I was waving at them.
Did they wave back? I forget, Berto.
I didn't see them. They're being very rude. They weren't coming out of their hiding spots.
So there was a lot of information that we wove into that program about why voter turnout is so low for that 18 to 29 age group, actually. So we had a story from Arkansas, which has one of the lowest voting registration rates, and heard from young people who are trying to change that from both sides. There was a young Republican and a young Democrat, and how they're doing that, how they're going on college campuses and making sure to reach out to their peers, because you're just much more likely to be able to engage in a conversation about voting if someone comes up to you who's your own age, and can really share your experiences and, speaking very familiar terms about the struggles of like figuring out how to register to vote and maybe, kind of balancing work and classes and figuring out, when to cast the vote and how to register and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of great information in that program that we would love to share widely. If you know anyone who might be able to use this half-hour program in their in their classroom. There's also great resources from media-wise about how to tell fact and fiction and sort of like political ads. So we're really trying to help kind of demystify and help students feel comfortable, young people feel comfortable with this first vote and feel like they have the information to make decisions. Berto, yeah, I would love to hear from you about the experience and your perspective on that.
It was honestly a very surreal experience, because my prior experience to working with PBS NewsHour was back in the SRL Academy, where it was more like we were all taken from like all around the US and like making a story, and then now we're like in one place, but like in a very like professional setting. I felt very professional. I felt very like innovative. I felt like really I was making a difference with more people my age, because like Gen Z, they don't really like. I can see there's a reason like they aren't really involved in things that are like voting and stuff, because that seems more like a job for the older generation. But it's not really processing that like they are now becoming that generation. It's becoming younger to people being able to vote and do everything. And I feel like I was very helping in like getting the word out there to people more my age, since I'm more their demographic, and they'll be more likely to listen to people like me and Tiffany than someone who's like excuse my French, a baby boomer. And I feel like it was very fun. I felt it was nice. It was nice, I felt like I wasn't really making a difference. And I feel like there's a lot of people from my school, they talked to me after the program was finished today. I was getting like lots of people talking to me like, oh, how was it? How did it go? Like asking me questions about things. And frankly, I didn't have much answers, but it got them to make their own research and get involved more into voting as young people. Yeah,
that's awesome. I'm so excited to watch the 30-minute program, and Vicky was kind enough, and Leah as well, to share the YouTube link. So definitely save that from the chat. So voters of tomorrow, and we have Santiago himself listening in, the founder who I mentioned, and Jack Lobel also from Voters of Tomorrow. Shout out to them. Hi. So I would love to hear from Grace and then Victor from Voters of Tomorrow about the work you're doing to get out that vote among Gen Z for the midterms. So Grace and then Victor.
Yeah, so we have been, you can ask anyone on the VO team, which is what we like to refer to ourselves as. We have been working for the past few months nonstop election mode. We have connected with campaigns. We've been working in, I believe our number's up to 27 now districts across the country, where the margin in the 2020 election is smaller than the amount of young people who turned 18 since then. So we're working in districts where young people could truly change the outcome of the election. We have an amazing organizing program that's sent over 3 million texts to young people across the country so far. And I'm really excited for on election day, where all the heads are congregating in DC to do a lot of get out the vote work. And we're just really proud of the amount of engagement we've seen from Gen Z, from the young people we've talked to across the country, who are really focused on getting young people out to vote in a way that we've never seen before, especially for a midterm election. So we're really excited to see what happens. And we truly think that the youth vote is going to be a huge, huge factor in this election. Pass it to Victor.
Yeah, Victor.
So first of all, thank you so much for doing this conversation. And also, I just have to give a shout out to my high school government teacher, Mr. Kaneen, who's on this call, who was monumental in terms of engaging civic students and a lot of my ways of thinking about how to get students involved civically really come from his class. So always grateful and so great to see Mr. Crenine on this call. But in terms of what Voters of Tomorrow is doing, Grace really hit it nail on the head. There's so much that we're doing in terms of trying to mobilize the youth vote. We're doing text messages, we're doing phone banks, a lot of what Leah alluded to, relational organizing, really making sure that young people hear from young people and have those individual conversations. So there's kind of like the engagement front, but there's also more the educational front too. So if you go on the VOT Instagram page or Twitter page, you'll see we have a ton of information in terms of how you can register to vote. What are the resources that you need to go out there and vote so that you're aware of what's going on in your state and in your district, perhaps. So a lot of it is engagement, but also making sure that young people have the tools, have the resources, and have that knowledge to make sure they can go out there and vote in the best way possible.
Amazing. I had one question just related to what Grace mentioned, which is there were certain districts and areas that you're focusing on right now where you think could make a difference in terms of getting out the youth vote. Would love to hear where that might be.
For sure. So it's a bunch of different House races across let me pull up our spreadsheet really quick because there are too many of them to keep track of. But it's just all of these districts where we really believe that the youth vote can make the difference. The margin was smaller than the amount of young people who turned 18 since then. So if every single young person votes, then that'll make the difference. We have them we're working districts in Arizona, California, Florida, Iowa, Michigan, North Carolina, New Jersey, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and more. I could go on. But just races across the country that we've seen youth engagement in, and we're really excited about.
Thank
and
you.
If I can just add one thing is, one of the things that I think Voters of Tomorrow is really focusing on too is making sure that we hit a lot of those down ballot races, things that aren't just Congress, right? We talk a lot about national races, Senate, House, but one of the things that hopefully young people can become more aware of and something that we've seen a lot more attention being paid to is some of those down ballot races, because those, I think, to me at least as a young person, are some of where the scariest things are happening and some of the most consequential decisions can be made that can impact all of our lives more than what happens on the federal level.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's something that I always try to emphasize with my students, that look beyond the presidential election, because so much that makes a difference in their day-to-day lives happens at the local level. Which brings me to my next question. And let's go to Berto, and then Grace, and Victor. How can teachers inspire students to get involved in politics and get interested in civics, even if they're not 18 yet? Berto?
I think a way that teachers can make it more interesting to students is try to relate to problems that are more related to the younger generation rather than the older generation. Because usually when you hear about elections and voting, it's all about like typical like politics stuff that like wouldn't really affect, or like wouldn't like young people wouldn't understand or like get. I feel like if teachers like try to broaden the spectrum of what their own issues are and then make it to like would be issues for like Gen Z, or like think about problems that would affect them more and then in their future than what's happening now, I think that would be able to get them more involved to try to change it so their future in this country would be better and more ideal for them compared to what it is right now.
That's awesome. So make it more tangible and relatable.
Yeah, you know.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. Teachers, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that when we open up the conversation. Grace, and then Victor.
Yeah, so first of all, Berto is absolutely right. I think making it more tangible for students to understand not only what the issues are, but how they affect them. And then if students, and I'm sure most of your students are under 18, there's still a huge world of difference that they can make. I started at Voters of Tomorrow when I was 15, and I voted for the first time last week, which was really exciting. But encourage them to register voters, do GOTV, learn about politics, involve themselves in decisions. They can call representatives. Even if, my biggest thing is, even if you can't vote yet, you're still a constituent of whoever your representative is, and you deserve to have them listen to you the same way they would listen to someone who can vote for them. And so just encouraging them to learn, encouraging them to understand the issues that affect them, the issues that affect their families, and do the best they can, and then register to vote right when they turn 18, encourage their friends to register to vote, because we say this all the time, the biggest marker of knowing if someone is going to vote in the future is if they voted before. So if we get kids started voting in their first elections, we'll have voters for life. So yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Victor?
I mean, I agree with everything that Berto and Grace said, making it more tangible, making sure that kind of students can relate to the issues, starting small. In terms of, if I can just add a couple of things. First is, I think so much of the national conversation or conversation about how to get young people is kind of really broad. And I think making it specific, making it so that young people know that you can start local, you can start in your community, really anything makes a difference. And I can just speak off of personal experience, and Grace alluded to this. It only really takes one thing to feel like you have power in your community, to really make you feel like you have a place in your community, to make you feel like you have a voice. And so giving students that opportunity to find their voice, whether it be in the classroom or at the school board district or in the village board district, all of those things I think really give young people a sense of agency and empowerment that really goes a long way. And the second is, I think, bringing politics to students. One of the things that I remember vividly that from my high school experience was that we would have like candidate fairs where a bunch of candidates would come to the high school, talk to young voters, talk to young people about their platform. And in hindsight, that was so powerful because you had so many young people really see the process at work. They saw democracy function, and by seeing these candidates and talking to them, it made politics a little bit more human and a little bit more personable. So finding those opportunities to make politics more engaging and more really accessible to everyone, I think goes a really long way. But definitely echo what Berto and Grace said as well.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. And Leah, I'd love to hear, sorry, Leah, I'd love to hear from you too, just because you have such an interesting vantage point working with all these young reporters. What do you find to get them most interested? What topics are they most excited to explore? And perhaps some insight you can share with us teachers.
Yeah, sure. And Berto did an amazing interview with Rachel Genfaza, who is a Gen Z reporter who worked for CNN covering Gen Z and politics. Berto, do you remember what she said when you asked her, what about young people who think that their vote doesn't matter?
I remember asking the question. I kind of remember like bits and pieces of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so she said, if you don't vote, then the people who do vote have a much, like they're the ones who are making the decision. You're giving them your power. You're handing it to them.
You're letting them control your future. For in a premise. Yes, I remember. Yeah, I remember we talked about that. Yeah, because if you don't register to vote, you're giving away your power to make the ideal future for you.
Yeah, and just someone who you disagree with, which, so I feel like that strikes the chord, kind of the idea that it's not just that you're not having a say, it's that you're giving someone who you disagree with more power, which makes a big difference. I think also, we just did a focus group with first-time voters in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago, and it ran on the NewsHour. The things that we heard, definitely, there was one, they were all in high school or like beginning college. This was their first vote, and definitely, climate change really struck a chord. And one of the college students was saying, like, politicians who are 60 and 70 years old, climate change just doesn't matter that much to them, because like they can deal with like 1 degree hotter and some of the weather changes and climate changes that we're going to see. But to me, he was saying, me being a 20-year-old young person, he was like, can I ethically have children to bring into a world where I feel like they're going to see much more dramatic changes? And so he just saw it from a very different perspective than someone, the traditional politicians who are like 50, 60, 70 years old. So I think definitely climate change is a big one. We heard from a lot of the students about the Roe v. Wade decision and reproductive rights. We heard a lot about the economy and feeling the price of gas going up, feeling the cost of, food, and this is the first time that this generation is experiencing inflation. And so I think that's really kind of making people think about the policies that are in place. And we also heard a lot about student debt and higher education and education in general. A lot of young people who really care about education. In our story, we asked students, like, I'm voting because they sort of finished the sentence, and it's a part of our program. And you definitely hear there's one student who says, I want to become a teacher, so I'm really looking closely at what candidates are saying about education funding, support for teachers. So they are, so smart, so clued in. But the issues definitely sound, different than when you talk to older voters.
Awesome. It's so great to hear the list of what is on their minds. So speaking of the youth vote, Victor, I'm going to toss this to you because I've seen some of your tweets about this. Been seeing some headlines, and I know that we're all a little disappointed by some of the headlines right now. Depending on where you stand on both sides of the aisle, people get disappointed by the headlines during the midterms, right? But I've been seeing some headlines. I don't know if, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Victor, that, youth turnout is low. What's going on with the youth vote? Just going to throw that to you, Victor.
Yeah, so I've seen those headlines all across my Twitter feed and news sources that I'm subscribed to. Politico the other day, I think, was the worst, where they basically said young voters are MIA in this election. And I think it's a really dangerous narrative. I kind of see the tendency to do so, because historically young people haven't turned out at the rate of older generations, but really that started changing in 2018. You saw so many young people go out to the ballot box and make their voices heard. That's what led to a blue wave in 2018. That's what led to Democrats winning in 2018. In 2020, you saw that trend continue. That's in part what helped elect President Biden. That's in part what helped Democrats win control of both chambers of Congress. And so I think it's irresponsible to kind of continue framing that narrative that young people stay at home in this election cycle, because what I think it does is it creates a sense of despair among young people that it's okay to basically stay at home, that basically their vote doesn't matter, when in fact that's the opposite. And in fact, a lot of the data that we're seeing right now from just the early states, from early voting that we're tracking, is that young voters are turning out to vote this election cycle, particularly in Pennsylvania, particularly in battleground states. You're seeing a lot more young people, especially young Democrats, turn out to vote and make their voices heard. So I just think, we have 6 more days until election cycle. You have a lot of voters who feel the thrill of first-time voting, who want to get out there and kind of feel that excitement of what it feels like to vote in person. And so not everything is going to be kind of because of mail-in ballots. You have to wait for young people to actually go to the polls, and then we can talk about what young people do. But to create that narrative before young people actually turn out to vote, I think is just really bad framing and honestly dangerous for turnout among young people.
Thank you so much. Perfectly stated, I think. So what can we do as educators who are in the classroom to mitigate the situation and give hope back to students? So if they do see those headlines, how do we help them detect that headlines they should be paying attention to, ones they should be ignoring? Because the last thing we want are, as young people in our classrooms who are either encouraging some older peers to vote or might be of voting age themselves to feel deterred. So I love turning it to you. Let the students be the teachers, right? So what advice do you have for teachers who are in the classrooms this week? How do we help counter that narrative with some facts?
So I guess I can take the first stab at this. I think a lot of kind of the way that adults typically talk to young voters is, okay, like the world is on your shoulders. You have to turn out to vote. If you don't vote, then there's a certain level of shame to it. I think what teachers can do, and this is where really the power of any adult who's talking to a young person can do, is really tell young people the power of their vote, especially in this election. There are so many races where the margin is, a couple of votes or maybe one vote. And so getting young people to know that they have power in their vote and their vote matters and makes a difference is, I think, one of the most important things. And then just giving them the opportunity to register to vote in the classroom or point them to resources, giving them, again, that knowledge and those resources to help them make that decision, ultimately go vote.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Berto.
I think helping them be able to recognize what is misinformation and what is real is something that can very much be very helpful to them, because there's lots of time where like you could see a random thing on Instagram or social media, but it's clearly fake or something, or it's something that's actually real but look incredibly similar, because deep fakes and things are very like common nowadays. I think that is something that you should be able to teach young people to like tell the difference from, so they actually care about whatever they see on social media just like randomly. Also, to let them know that like their opinion is valid and that what they think is important and their input is it's worth listening to for when they want to like share their opinions or give their voting. Because I feel like there's lots of times where young people, especially in this generation, are put down or shunned for their way of thinking because of traditional views or values. Like, as I said, this world is always like, it will keep going and the people here will keep changing. And nowadays, like young people and older people have different ways of thinking. All right. Just that older people are given more like authority, and they push it onto younger people to the point where they stay quiet or they just think their opinion isn't valid or mattered, or they won't be listened to. I feel like if you let the classroom be a safe space so they can share how they feel without getting shunned or judged, that would make them be more comfortable for when it comes into the real world to import their opinions and values to voting in any level, federal, state, or local. I think that's why it's important to get kids involved in student government at a young age, so they get used to that as they as they get older. Kind of like when you learn languages. It's easier the younger you are, but harder the older you get.
I love that. And I agree. It's the best place to start getting people to have productive conversations, even with people with whom they disagree, is the classroom, because it should be a safe space. And providing young people with, I hate using the word norms, but discussion norms, like ways to have those conversations, the tools, so that they're not taking to places like Twitter, and well, we know what happens there.
Yeah.
Right.
Free speech, am I right? Yeah.
Right. That's a whole other Zoom. Don't get me started.
Yeah, but also like to teach them how to like deal with people who disagree with them as well, like Democrats and Republicans. How to like you can listen to them, but also at least try to respect their. You don't have to agree. Just gotta respect. All right. No, we don't need no battles. All right. Yeah. Violence is never the answer unless Super Smash Bros.
Grace, would love to hear your insight.
Yeah. So Berto and Victor, first of all, are absolutely right. Everything they said is on point. I'll also say Gen Z loves to prove people wrong. That is one thing we are very good at. And yes, and I think, first of all, these news stories, not only are they harmful in terms of misinformation, they're harmful in that they're telling students indirectly or directly that their vote doesn't matter because we're not turning out, and it's discouraging. And it makes us not want to. So one thing I think teachers can absolutely do, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat, which is absolutely right, is not only saying how it's important to vote, not only saying you should, but teaching how to do it, teaching hands-on civic engagement. So how to register, when to register, if you can register early, if there's early voting, teaching them how the democratic system works so that teaching them how the democratic system works so that we can actually take action on it. Because a lot of the issue, I think, with why people are reporting low turnout is because they believe young people don't really know how, don't want to, but we can do it. And that's what every headline before 2018, before 2020, it's always the kids aren't voting. We are. So I will just say that.
I love that. And if you haven't tweeted that yet, Grace, if you're still on Twitter, I don't know, wherever we're going to message these days in the future. I love the quote, Gen Z loves to prove people wrong. And as a high school teacher who teaches juniors, I agree. So let's open up. I have some more questions for y'all, but I want to open up the floor to our other guests. And I saw a question from Mary Ellen and would love to have her ask it. It's about tips for teaching media literacy. So Mary Ellen, take it away.
Oh, I was just thinking, I see my students as kind of overwhelmed and oversaturated with news media, social media. And I'm kind of wondering what you think might just be kind of an engaging way to, make them excited about learning it. I think it's important, but
I'll let anyone take that.
I'd love to quick mention something about that. I had in my senior year of high school, I took a class called Issues in Modern America. And I had an amazing teacher who every once in a while we do these current events assignments. And it was just a short presentation, short writing something, but it was anything. There was no topic, and there's no topic you had to follow. You just find a news article, something you're interested in, something you care about, something you didn't know about before, that you learn about, you write about, you talk about it. And we would just get to be in class and talk about current events, which was, I think, a way that we could both learn about what was going on, learn about why it's important, learn about it from other people our age, which is a lot of times something, because when you hear something from a teacher, this is important, and you write it down in your notes. And I'm not disregarding the voice of the teacher at all, but hearing something from another person your age is a different experience. And it, especially when you're having a conversation about it, and we also practice having those tough conversations in this class. And so I think just letting students explore current events, explore news on their own, but in a way that encourages them to find reliable news sources and talk about it in a way that you can talk over differences with other students is so important. And I really loved it.
Thank you. That's so helpful. Berto or Victor? Berto, you want to, or Victor? Yeah, Victor.
Sure. I'll just quickly say everything Grace said is so true. I haven't taken any news literacy class or anything along those lines, but I'll just say, speaking off of personal experience and thinking of ways that we can make news literacy and that kind of more engaging for young people, I think kind of touching on what Grace said, just making it so that young people can take it into their own hands. So much of kind of news literacy, I think, relates to the fact that we're so online. And so everything that we read probably has some sort of news literacy component. Is doing exercises where young people can go and maybe kind of look out news articles, find opinion pieces, kind of distinguish the difference between fact and fiction. And then I know as well, like when I read a news story, there's so much of, okay, like you read something and there are like hyperlinks. So like getting students to like click on the original source, know what the difference is between primary and secondary sources. So a lot of those things where you can kind of get young people to find the articles themselves, a current event article, maybe an opinion piece, and kind of distinguish between what is fact, what is opinion, and what is fiction, I think could be an interesting way to get young people more engaged in learning about news literacy.
I agree with what they both said. I feel like it's a way of like, instead of just presenting information, get them informed about bits and pieces and to make them interested enough to try to find it themselves, but also like implanting some current like trends. So that makes it a bit more like familiar to them to try to piece again the pieces in their mind to try to find out like what exactly is happening, and and making it so like it's more they're doing it instead of you telling them, and that and makes them more like engaged or to get involved in a sense.
If I can kind of just quickly butt in here, I'm in another call, but I heard this question I had to answer. I think the most important thing that teachers can do is teach their students the difference between commentary and news, because there is an epidemic in this country of commentary masquerading as news, and we see it across news media. I mean, it's particularly common in TV, but it also happens in print and it also happens online. And I think it is very important for students to be able to tell when someone is presenting facts versus when someone is presenting their opinion of the facts. And there are many ways to do this, but I think explaining the difference and explaining how you can tell those two apart is incredibly important, something that we need more of in the US.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
going back to my other column.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Santiago. And once again, he's the founder of Voters of Tomorrow. And I wrote that down in the chat just so we can put a pin in it. The idea that yes, a lot of news, a lot of commentary is masquerading as news these days. And even adults who are seasoned news readers can get confused by it, right? Yeah, Mary Ellen wrote commentary versus news note to self. So kind of aligned with that conversation and that topic, Liz, you have a great question about just what's about news organizations that young consumers find engaging. So I'd love for you to elaborate on that question.
Yes, so I find, forgive me, I got a club going on here. I find that students want something cool or engaging. What are your go-to news organizations, whether it be print, video, that you find engaging and you guys enjoy? So we're a slightly different generation.
I'll let any of you jump in.
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment about that. That's a great question because I think it's definitely hard to find news that young people want to read at this point. It's either it's the news or it's just not engaging. So I can talk a little bit about how I do it. A great way to do it, I get an email from the New York Times every morning with just quick stories. Just being aware and being able to click on things that I am interested in. So some way of just getting a bunch of news at once, and you can explore what you're more interested in. Sorry. And then the other thing is as scary as this sounds, is social media, if you do it right, is a huge source of news that really honestly can be informative and smart and useful if you do it right. So there's certain TikTokers who I know and I trust, and I have looked at stories that they've talked about in the past that I see about news, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And then encouraging them to, once they know this, not take it at face value and go look it up, find another article about it. But using social media, yeah, on TikTok. I will come back to that. I'll find a few that I like and I'll send them in the chat, a few TikTokers that I like. But not taking them at face value and encouraging them to use social media as a starting point of finding stories and then going elsewhere to learn about them once they're interested in them.
That is such a great lesson idea, Grace, because I know that I sometimes catch my students scrolling through TikTok when they're multitasking and doing the lesson. Shout out to those students. They usually get the work done, so they're doing something right. But I think it would be really cool to, share a few TikToks and then have them do some of those media literacy exercises, sourcing. And Berto mentions that he likes Good Morning Bad News. Yeah, I think it'd be super cool if we could create a running list of TikTokers where young people, Gen Z, are getting their news for us older folk, so we know how to work with them on that. Victor and Berto, any news sources that your generation enjoys that we should know about?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Berto.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, me personally, I don't really have like a general main news source. I just follow like a few like accounts primarily on TikTok that I scroll through, and then sometimes they talk about like interesting topics, things like how like others the doing like because like things like that millennials may never be able to retire, or Elon Musk taking over Twitter or other things, are like more like I follow more news stories that take care of like topics that are like more not mainstream but also still important for people to realize. Yeah, that's like because I'm not really skilled in like getting involved, like getting like keeping on track with everything. Yeah, I want to, but like I don't really know how, in my opinion, like to be honest, or where to start.
That makes sense. Thank you. Victor.
Liz, that's such a good question, because I was trying to think of, I've had a lot of conversation with young people about how they consume their information, and a lot of it's on social media. I don't think I could track a single young person who reads the more kind of traditional outlets like the Washington Post or the New York Times. I mean, there are many people who are politically engaged who read that, but not many ordinary young people who read those things. And so what I've been encouraging young people to read, and personally my favorite is Axios. So I know young people are busy all the time, and Axios, the whole kind of brand of Axios is basically smart brevity, saying basically more with less. And so for young people, it's just like a simple email, 10 things per day, where like, the top 10 most important things or top 10 news headlines, where they can just kind of scroll through and kind of learn about, okay, what is the story? What is the significance? There's an option to go deeper. And so I think Axios does a really good job. And just want to echo what Grace said about social media. There is so much misinformation, disinformation on TikTok and Instagram. And that's where I think news literacy and classrooms and teachers and critical thinking come into play. But it's also a really good way to consume information, because you have a lot of people on there who are either debunking information or using it to spread awareness about the news of the day. There was a recent article posted by, I think, the Washington Post, where basically the White House realized like the best way to basically get a message out there is by using young TikTok creators, because that's how young people consume information. They go to social media platforms, and then if the White House, I guess, knows that they can reach young people through different young kind of activists or creators, that's how young people can actually get that information. So a lot of how young people, I think, digest information is through TikTok. And if we can kind of create a generation of young people who know how to detect misinformation and how to respond to that I think could be really powerful.
Thank you so much. And Santiago jumped in and said, Voters of Tomorrow is doing this as well. Goes without saying, but we must say it nonetheless. And Berto is a content creator, so we need to follow Berto. And if you aren't following Voters of Tomorrow, Grace, Leah, Student Reporting Labs, or Victor, please follow them and follow each other as well. So shifting gears a little bit, great question here from Natalia. Just going to let you ask it. Hi, Natalia.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Natalia. So I'm a college professor, and my colleague is on the call too. Wendy Howe is an anthropologist at St. Lawrence University, and I teach in the English department. And we've been very busy trying to register students. And I hope Wendy will say something about Andrew Goodman Foundation at some point, if it fits into the conversation. So I have been on Twitter trying to find good news from people I trust. I'm sure a lot of you follow the news that some of these polls were paid for. The bleak polls the last couple weeks. And Simon Rosenberg and Tom Bonnier have been sort of my and Voters of Tomorrow are the people I follow regularly to get better news. And so my question is this: Tom Bonnier is the one. Those of you who don't know him, he's the founder of Target Smart, and he's the one who is writing a lot of op-eds and so on after the Dobbs decision, tracking the big uptick in voter registration among young people, and particularly among young women. And he, tracked the Kansas vote, for example, as an example. And polling could not have predicted any of this, because polling is not going to get young people on cell phones, people who don't answer the phone, et cetera. And so Tom Bonnier keeps saying on Twitter that the word on the street is that Gen Z is planning to vote on the day itself. I don't know if that's true, or if you're hearing that. I'd really like to know about that. And the other question I want to know from Voters of Tomorrow organizers, Are you seeing voter suppression? I mean, I know, for example, in Texas, it's we've all followed how they've shut down voting options since 2018 on campuses. And, there are some people that have to travel like 17 miles to vote, things like that. So I know it's very difficult there. So I'd like to just hear about what it's like on the street for those of you who are actually doing this work among your peers. Really just like day to day, how is it going? What's happening?
That's a great question. Grace.
Yeah.
Grace or Victor?
Absolutely. Yeah. That question made me so excited. First of all, to answer really quick about Texas, absolutely, we're seeing voter suppression. It's intentionally difficult for young people, for college students to vote. I believe it was last week, had a VOT member down at Texas A&M, and we had a bus taking students from the campus to early voting sites, which is one thing that, like I said, we were working on the ground. But there's definitely, we're seeing voter suppression, whether it's laws where you can only vote where your home address is, which hurts college students. But I think that the more information we can get out there about, like I was talking about before, the how to vote information, the better it's going to be. The how to vote by mail, how to vote absentee. I had friends from high school from all over the country swiping up on my Instagram stories saying, hey, do you know if I can vote in the state I'm in college? Like, how do I do that? And I would get so excited. And then to your part about the Dobbs decision too, I do think that decision definitely on its own got people to register to vote, but I also think that just the amount of vision and the amount of attention that the decision got, and the amount of attention that it got causing people to outcry, register to vote, also was a huge factor. The more we talk about voting, the more people are going to say, oh, this is something I should do. So even despite the decision, which obviously was a huge factor in and of itself, the more we talk about it, the more people are going to vote. And we're holding out for those voters on election day. We do believe that Gen Z is going to show up in huge numbers on election day. Yeah.
Well, I have good news for you. Arizona State University, which is the largest university in the United States, has a major voting drive going on. I saw it. So even though you keep hearing about people threatening voters in Arizona, you also have an enormous there's 3 campuses, registration going on, and ballot drop places on the campus. Now, on the other hand, I heard from my alma mater of Vassar, there's no way for them to vote. Those who are from New York, there is no ballot place that they can drop ballots at all, not even in the city of Poughkeepsie near them. So, I mean, there are plans against various places, but the ASU students are fighting back, and there are like, what's 190,000 of them in all. So interesting.
Good news. Natalia, you wanted to have a follow-up question? Thank you, Sid. That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
That is really, really good to hear. And it just makes me wonder if there should be, I mean, Wendy, step in any time if maybe Vassar needs a chapter of the Andrew Goodman Foundation. But what I was going to say is that the part where you mentioned, Grace, that you're thinking E-Day itself is going to be the big day. Like, why is that? I mean, that's what Tom Bonnier says, but hasn't said why. And I mean, is it like a plan? I mean, is it like, this is what people want to do because it's exciting, or is it just more practical?
I think the excitement definitely is part of it, especially for first-time voters. Like, we're going to vote on election day. Like, that's definitely part of it, I think. I think it's also, like I was talking about before, the knowing how to vote. I think in a lot of young people's minds, you vote on election day. So I voted early when I was home for fall break, but I think for people who have the opportunity to vote on election day, who are at home, that's what they know, that's what they've always known, that's what they hear. And so that's part of it too, I think. Other than that, we've seen just from the numbers, our own polling that we've done within Voters Tomorrow, polling we've seen around with what we're thinking the voter turnout is going to be like. That's what we're seeing, is that we're expecting a huge young voter turnout, and we believe that most of that is going to be on election day, yes, or by mail-in ballots, which haven't arrived yet that haven't arrived back at their polling places yet.
That's helpful, Grace. And I just wanted to call out Santiago, who ultimate multitasker, threw in a tweet he was responding to, I think, Charles Gaba's similar question. And just to read from what I often do, read Santiago's tweets, and a lot of us do. It's a mix of reasons he tweeted. Procrastination is definitely one of them. A few others he can think of: less experience with mail, less knowledgeable about early voting processes, like Grace was saying, many not eligible to vote early, and like Grace was saying, wanting to get the E-Day experience and having to show voter registration card, etc. So that's interesting. Victor, we didn't get to say goodbye to Victor, but thank you, Victor, so much for joining when you watch this later. Berto, any thoughts on that?
What was the question again?
I guess we're trying to wonder, Natalia wanted to know why young people might be waiting until election day to vote.
Oh, well, in all honesty, it's mostly because like a lot of people not my age, I know they love procrastinating. The idea of getting something done before it needs to get done is it's kind of hard. But also because I feel like it's since it's a new experience, they tend to stay away from it as long as they can until it actually has become like a really big deal. Which is something I feel like we need to like try to change the type of mindset to more like a mindset of like, if I do this now, it won't be as hard as when like it needs to come and be pursued. You know, like something at a timely pace. So like the reality and nervousness of the situation won't be as bad if you just take it by slow.
I wish you could tell that to my studio. Yeah, and Santiago, love to hear from you. I just read your tweet, but yeah, I just read your tweet.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, but tell us more. Elaborate in real life.
Yes, it worked out because I literally wrapped my call as soon as Victor popped off. So I'm Victor for 2 seconds. Yeah, so just to kind of expand on my tweet, we have been tracking numbers both through our own internal polling, public polling, and some of the data that we get from TargetSmart. We are proud clients of Tom Vanier and TargetSmart. And of what we have been tracking, we're expecting ranges of up to 88% of the youth vote to come on election day, in large part because of the many reasons that I put in the tweet. But also, many people are not taking into account that after the 2020 election, many states passed laws restricting early voting and restricting eligibility. Many other states also passed laws to make it more difficult for young voters to vote for the first time, including requirements to go and show up your voter registration card when you're voting for the first time, which has been a requirement in some states for a while, but it got expanded into many other states. So that's also now something that young people are having to consider before they're able to vote. They have to go up in person and show their voter registration card in order to cast a ballot. Finally, we also know that many people, whether they're first-time voters or whether they might have become eligible to vote in 2020, they were not able to get that election day experience. And that is something that's so important because it is a fundamental part of becoming an active citizen in democracy. I think Grace mentioned this earlier, but a person that casts a vote for the first time is much more likely to continue voting for the rest of their lives. So big part of everything that's going on is there has been a push to get people to vote in person because we want them to have that experience and we do want them to become lifetime voters. We have not been a part of this push in particular because we think that voting is important no matter when you vote. But many organizations have been pushing for in-person election day voting. And that really means that we're going to see a big youth surge on election day. I think if you're more interested in this, because I do not have, there's so many things going on in my head, but so I do not have all the numbers, but the latest Harvard Youth Survey has some more data on this. John Delavolpe, who's the director of polling at the Harvard Institute of Politics, also has presented some analysis on this. And obviously Tom Bonnier is fantastic and has expanded on this on Twitter as well.
Thank you so much. And I just want to call this out. Vicky put it in the chat, but Vicky wrote, I'd like to point out that Santiago Meyer started Voters of Tomorrow. He's not even allowed to vote in the US because he's not a citizen. It's hard to think of a better example of civic engagement than that. Starting a voting organization when you yourself cannot vote. Let me say that again, starting a voting organization when you yourself can't vote and creating this, just all these chapters and communities, it's just astounding. So thank you for all the work you're doing and continue to do through and after Election Day.
Listen, I think it goes hand in hand. Thank you. I think it goes hand in hand. I can't cast a ballot, but I can make sure that everyone who can cast a ballot. And at the end of the day, Gen Z broadly a creation of a variety of things. So the best way that I can make my voice heard is by making sure that people my age have their voices heard. And Sari, you will recognize this phrase because we have been saying this since 2020, but your votes matter and your voices matter. And when you cast a ballot, you are making your voices heard. So we want to make sure that every single eligible young voter is making their voice heard and making sure that their vote matters.
I love that. And if you want to get your students involved in either Voters of Tomorrow or PBS Student Reporting Labs, you can either reach out to Leah or Santiago or Grace or Victor or anyone else in these organizations. And Leah just dropped her email in the chat. And if you're watching later, we can share it with you as well. And we're nearing the end of our conversation. So I guess wanted to just final thoughts from our guests tonight, and we'll include Santiago as well. Let's start with Leah. What are your final thoughts based on this conversation tonight, and looking forward to E-Day, as we're calling it?
Yeah, no, this has been fantastic and so great to learn all about the work that Grace and Victor and Santiago have been doing. And I think that, also taking into consideration what I heard a lot from young people, which is when they were told by adults to just go vote, just go vote, they were kind of like, this were like 3 of our fellows at our academy were telling me that they feel like in some ways it can ring hollow when it's kind of like, we've broken the world, you guys need to fix it, you need to go vote. I think that one of the students told me, well, it sounds like, thoughts and prayers go out to you. It just seems like words that people tell us, just go vote. So I think it really comes down to how invested we are in the young people that we're speaking to and that we're teaching, and really working with them to understand what's at stake, what each vote means, what are the issues, and where to get good information. We put a couple of links in the chat because there are amazing resources out there. It's really about the connection and the support and the respect that we're giving young people to kind of recognize that this is something that they want to do, and they recognize the value and the purpose of it. So I would just say, being straightforward about that, recognizing that they in some cases do feel kind of helpless, or that it doesn't matter, and so really addressing that head on instead of skirting it and kind of talking about things that they've heard before, and making it more personal and a direct part of the relationship between the teacher and the student, because that's what, you're doing is you're helping them become adults, which is super important. And voting's a really big part of that.
That's amazing advice. And thank you, Leah, for all you do, including giving us this space that we enjoy so much. Berto, final thoughts and takeaways from the conversation tonight. And once again, congratulations on your show. I can't wait to watch it later.
Thank you. I guess my final thoughts is that this was very it's very educational information that I definitely learned a little bit of things, but also like I would reflect more on like myself and Gen Z. I feel like we should always keep striving to try to encourage voting, even though it may seem like sometimes it's kind of like bleak, but I sort of like if we just keep trying and find new ways, innovative ways to get people more involved and engaged, we can definitely see a better turnout for the future and like a future for the country as well, where the people living in it are actually solving problems instead of like complaining about them.
That's incredible, and I love that you're always reflecting. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
That makes you the amazing reporter and host that you are. So thank you.
Yeah. It's important to be like self-aware of like yourself and other people and your surroundings, to be more like to be a reporter, you have to be very like open-minded to everyone's opinions and like not take any bias, not take any sides, and just be able to listen without like inferring your own thoughts and feelings prior. Because as a reporter, it's not always about you. It's about the person reporting and the topic is hand, and that needs to come first. It's a part of like putting away that size of ego for the greater good of getting information out there.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to follow you. We just got your IG in the chat. So Grace and then Santiago, final thoughts, and then we'll wrap, and then Vicky will tell you about some upcoming events that we have.
Yeah, I first of all want to thank you all, everyone who made this happen. This has been amazing. I love talking to teachers, and I think that teachers are some of the most important role models for students, for young voters, because we as students, your students, have such a unique opportunity to influence the world at this point, especially with social media and everything that we can do with more civic engagement. And education about issues and education about voting is the first step to developing these students into civically engaged and informed young people. So I wanted to thank you guys all also, and just say that encourage your students to vote, teach them how to vote, encourage them to get involved and reach out to other young people. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. So I think that's all I've got to say.
Grace, and thank you so much. And when you said that you started doing this work when you were 15, I got really emotional because we went through the pandemic together.
Yeah.
2020 election and the aftermath. And you were in AP US history, and we were working on, I was not helping you.
I will say that Sari is the reason that I passed that AP US history test.
That is not true. That is not true.
It was after Zooms like these, it would be me and Sari on FaceTime and her telling me, getting me prepped for my APUSH test. So also thank you to Sari for that.
All on Zoom. I know it was such a strange time. And Santiago is another person that I think I spoke to Grace and Santiago and the team at Voters of Tomorrow more than my own friends during the pandemic, because we were working so hard in getting people to vote. But would love to hear some final thoughts and predictions from Santiago himself, and then we'll wrap up for the night.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think Grace hit the nail on the head. Teachers are the single most important element in helping shape how we call it the next generation of democracy defenders. We have seen that teachers have the ability to influence their students way beyond what they do in the classroom. And you all are playing an excellent role in helping young voters really understand the world and how the role that they play in it. We have seen that young voters want to protect democracy and support the freedom to be who they are and to make with their life what they choose. And right now we are seeing a coordinated effort to suppress young voters and make us all fit into a mold that was not shaped by any of us, but by people who have thoughts that belong in the 1800s, not in 2022. So I am still very optimistic that we are not only just going to see a youth wave next week, but that youth wave will usher in it with it a next generation, the next generation of leaders who will stand up and protect their democracy and continue to fight for youth and continue to enact legislation that elevates and protects youth values. And I am very tired, I am very stressed, but I am very optimistic and very, very confident that all the effort that Grace and Victor and Jack, who was here at some point, and the rest of the Voters of Tomorrow team has put into our organizing and turnout programs will pay off, and we will see a Gen Z wave on Tuesday.
Thank you so much. And quickly, my final thoughts are that this work still needs to be intergenerational. And those of you who were on Zooms with me all through 2020, I kept saying that. And I still think it's important in 2022 and beyond. That I was so sick of hearing my generation and other generations older than Gen Z saying, well, it's up to you to save us. And I said, no, this work needs to be intergenerational, like this call tonight, like this Zoom tonight. We need to work together. And this is just one of many ways we can do it, through education, through action and highlighting those actions. And tonight, I'm feeling inspired again about the direction of this country because of what Gen Z is doing and the work that all of us older folk are doing to support you and amplify you. So let's keep that up together. And I want to thank all the teachers and educators and academics and lovers of educators who joined us tonight and are watching later. And we've got this. And I came into the day feeling I was reading those headlines, those commentary headlines, but now I realize I need to focus on the news and the work on the ground. So thank you for all you're doing. And I'm going to just end it here. So we will have some more Zooms coming up. We will be promoting them on Twitter and elsewhere. We'll see where we all go. And I just want to thank everyone and thank Vicki, thank Leah, thank PBS NewsHour Classrooms, PBS Student Reporting Labs, Voters of Tomorrow, Berto, everyone here, and Grace, Victor, Santiago, and everyone. I'll just keep naming names so you can all go. But thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you all soon or online. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all so much.